Hello, Bradley. This is John. Thank you for all the help that you had over Thanksgiving break on this. All those emails were appreciated, and I'm sorry that this was such a mess for everybody. So, I chose just to do like the description kind of style rather than actually making it the original plan that you had us rolling with before we realized that everything was in chaos. So that's okay. We fixed it. We got it. So, I'm going to skip over this for the moment. I'm going to come back to this part. So, I'm also going to come back to this. So, my LMS that I chose was Canvas, which obviously we as Cincy students use for the main hub. So this one's pretty self-explanatory. Just like we do at Cincy, I plan on using Canvas as my learning management system, or LMS, for my classroom. This helps organize the information. I can lay out the asynchronous lessons, provide links and tools for the students to use, give in-depth explanations of all the activities, so on and so forth. I can provide the SWOBAT, the learning outcomes, the goals, all of that stuff that I have for the students. Canvas, in my opinion, is probably one of the better tools that we could have used. I've used Canvas for 3 or 4 years now, and I continue to fall in love with it over and over again. So, some of the other tools that I would use in this classroom and this lesson would be Splash Learning, in which I can assign individual assignments for students. I can personalize these or assign it to the class as a whole. This helps give them instantaneous feedback on assignments. Along with this tool can help break down bigger problems. So, I didn't do that right away. I'm sorry about that. So, my outcomes, my two SWOBATs are the same that I use for Showcase 3. Fractionize numbers into equal parts and begin to add and subtract basic fractions and decimals. That one was a little bit of adjusted. And SWOBAT, divide shapes into equal parts and be able to express it in fraction form. So really working with fractions and decimals and using shapes to help represent these. So Splash Learning, as I showed in Showcase 2, I would probably set up that same kind of lesson where they were using fractions, dividing into shapes, understanding like if a fraction is divided into 3, it's 1/3, or if a shape's divided into thirds, they're 1/3 of the shape, so on and so forth. Padlet I would also use. This would probably be like my introductory for this. I was kind of doing it as though it was an at-home assignment for students to do, although they could be in the classroom to do it. Either one would work. On the Padlet, I figured I would also put the SWOBATs and a couple goals that I have for the students, and then I would allow students to add to the Padlet and set their own goals for themselves and for the class. And this would help get some student-student collaboration. Students could see other people's goals, both for themselves and for the class. They might discuss about it, and they would be able to discuss this using Canvas. I would set up just a general discussion board room where students can either talk about fun stuff, out of school stuff, or use it for stuff like this where they could interact with one another if they are outside of the classroom at the time. Google Forms I would use as like a last check-in, just to see how students are feeling about the lesson. I also would either use this or Canvas to set up a small word problem quiz to see if students can really understand this. This will make sense later. YouTube I would have as an optional option if students need additional help understanding the lesson. I would provide links to a few YouTube videos that students could watch to help go more in depth with the lesson along with teaching it myself. Or students can just explore YouTube on their own, of course within limitations, and find their own videos that might help them understand the lesson better. And then Canva I would use as I did again for Showcase 2, and set it up as a Venn diagram where students can compare and contrast different shapes and fractions. This can either be done individually or in groups. Again, if a student's more comfortable working individually, they can compare and contrast them on their own. If they're in groups, I would have students probably pair up or group up into an even numbered group and compare and contrast the shapes that they come up with. And then I would finally use Genially. This would be a good tool for students to self-assess themselves, along with having fun and breaking down larger problems, trying to find that final answer, again, as I did in Showcase 2. So a lot of this lesson very easily could have been transported into Canvas from Showcase 2. again, I just decided to lay it out, but Showcase 2 would be a wonderful reference to show how some of the lessons might be set up for the SWOBATs. So, how will I engage learners? I will engage learners by using a Padlet rather than a PowerPoint that is designed and colorful, especially as this would be like later elementary or like very early middle school, probably later elementary, but still PowerPoints, we're tired of them. A Padlet definitely helps keep things interesting and engaging. It's a good way for students to look over what the learning goals and activities are, along with Canvas, and possibly having a small review of shapes. How will I help learners set goals? Again, I will use the Padlet. I will set learning goals that I have for the students, doing a simple review of shapes, and that way students can kind of judge where they are on shapes themselves before going into dividing them. I'll also have students, again, set their own goals for the class about where they want to be after this lesson. And that will help me as a teacher understand what students really want to work towards and how I can help. Then I can judge on how I can help best get them there. And how I'll help learners know expectations and what to do. I will help learners to know expectations, including these in the introduction Padlet, along with on Canvas. The Canvas module, again, will help set things up, lay things out on what is mandatory, what is optional for students to do. So content delivery. What content do students need to review to be successful? This really just reviewing those basic shapes, really having a good understanding of them before going into dividing the shapes into different parts. And then also reviewing, adding, and subtracting, even just whole numbers. That way when we get into fractions, we aren't going over the basics of just how to subtract and add. They already know that, but really pushing it to that next step and doing it with fractions and decimals. How will I provide multiple means of representation of the content? I will provide multiple means of representation by providing different options for students to do, giving them options to choose from. Hopefully they'll choose the ones that are best for them, maybe setting up a choice board kind of thing. So like if I have this Splash Learning, Genially, Canva, maybe a few other activities, the Google form quiz or the Canvas quiz, either one. I might have students choose like 2 or 3 of those 4, the ones that work best for them. And that way, if students want to do them all, I'm not going to complain about it. But if students feel more comfortable just doing a couple of them, that's an option. I will also be there if they're out of class on Zoom for students to Zoom in during certain hours, along with checking my email as often as possible to help students along. What tools will help to learners engage with the content? Splash Learning, Padlet, YouTube, Canva, Genially, and Google Forms all are the ones that primarily will help engage with the content. Within this, I have a more in-depth explanation on what each one of these will do. I will let you read through that on your own. That way I'm not taking up too much time with just reading off of what is written. But all of these tools, I believe, are very engaging for students. It's not just a boring lecture that students are going through. It will really help them keep engaged with the lesson. How will I as a teacher keep track of learners' progress? And how will I know that they have done what they needed to with the content? Again, Splash Learning is a wonderful tool for teachers as it gives in-depth feedback to the students, along with in-depth feedback on how the students are doing to the teachers. That one will probably be the big one on tracking progress. Additionally, Canva with the compare and contrasting Venn diagram, though that will take a bit more time as the teacher. It will be a good chance to really see how students are doing with this topic. Additionally, with the Google form, students checking in on that, understanding where they're at with that. And the quiz, seeing how students would do on a practice quiz, what they still need to accomplish, what they still need to do better at, so on and so forth. How will learners know what to do to be successful? Learners will know what to do to be successful by reviewing the Padlet and the Canvas. It will make for students to refer back to, as well as being available for students to Zoom or email with if students have questions or concerns about the work. And now we get into those computational thinking practices. So decomposition first. So Splash Learning will enable students to break down problems into individual steps is I can assign one or more activities that help to break down the addition and subtraction of fractions, along with breaking down dividing shapes into equal parts. So instead of, this is kind of what I was talking about with reviewing, instead of subtracting 2 minus 4/3 right away, I'll have students practice subtracting 2 minus 1, 4 minus 2, basic steps to really get them there. And like for subtracting 1 minus 1/3, breaking the problem down into easier, smaller parts. So instead of doing it straight from 1 to 1/3, setting it up so it's 3 over 3 minus 1 over 3. So that would be 2 over 3. Pattern recognition generally will be the tech tool that I will primarily use for this. Students will be able to pull out the similarities within different problems. If I make multiple Genially games, again like Showcase 2, the students will be able to see the similarities and differences within each of these games and see how they compare and contrast, and start to better be able to add and subtract fractions and divide shapes. As they will start recognizing similarities and differences in the problem. So like 1 minus 1/2, 1 minus 2/4, 1 minus 1/4 minus 1/4 all ultimately equal 1/2, but they are different ways to get to that answer. I could also use this as shapes, so like how I did with the Showcase 2 with the circle, triangle, and oval, or whatever the 3 shapes were, seeing the differences and similarities between the different shapes. Abstraction, students will be able to ignore all the extra details and just focus solely on the math problem. I can use a YouTube video that might be optional and a short word problem only online quiz using either Google Forms or the Canvas quiz to help students ignore the details and focus on the important part of the problem. So for YouTube videos that the students could watch, instead of ignoring all the fun jazzy stuff that the YouTube video might have, really pulling out the strength of the lesson from that YouTube video. And then for the word problem quiz, ignoring all the extra detail. You don't need to know the person's name or that they're cutting a pie into a certain amount, but understanding that they are cutting a circle-like object into equal parts and then figuring out how many equal parts that is. So that's really the trickiest part of word problems, is all the extra mumble jumble. Focusing on the key points is what's important, and I hope that this practice quiz would help students be able to do that. And then algorithmic thinking. Canvas will provide an algorithm for students to complete the assignments, giving them a general outline for what order to complete the assignments. Of course, they don't have to follow this. They'll have a bit of option and leeway into what they do, but if the student needs extra structure, I'll have the Canvas set up like that. The students don't necessarily have to follow that. Splash Learning will provide a time for algorithmic thinking, where students will complete their lessons in the order they're choosing, along with allowing students to skip certain ones if they feel confident in lower level skills. This gives students different paths that they can take within the tool, depending on how confident they are with different learning objectives, such as breaking down shapes and adding subtracting fractions. They might not need to review the simple adding and subtracting, or the simple of just identifying shapes. What content do I need to include, and what tools will I use to help learners engage with the content? Again, I kind of went over this earlier. I need to include the content of 1, dividing shapes into equal parts along with recognizing different shapes, 2, adding and subtracting fractions, and 3, combining them, adding and subtracting fractions of different shapes. So the shapes can kind of be representations of the fraction. Again, same kind of tools that I went over earlier. I kind of already explained these, so I will leave this up to you to read when I submit this, Bradley. Most of this is really just the same as earlier, just this one went into a bit more detail. So, for example, the Padlet's about the same with the SWOBAT, and students being able to set up their own goals and goals for the classroom. Splash Learning is both entertaining, educating, and engaging for the students. Genially is a good tool for self-assessment. Canva is a good tool for students to be able to pair up and buddy, especially if they're in person or online through Zoom, and really use that higher level thinking skill of comparing and contrasting. YouTube's a good chance of review, and Google Forms a good chance to check in. I would recommend reading these. I go a lot more in depth than what I am in this video. How will I keep track of learners' progress, and how will they evaluate their own progress? So I'll be able to track students' learning or progress using Canva, Google Forms, Padlet, Splash Learning, and Canvas, all five. Canva Canva will enable me to see how students are doing on higher level skills. Again, this one's comparing and contrasting. Google Forms will allow me to see how students are feeling themselves with the check-in form. Canvas will enable me to see how they're doing with a higher level skill of breaking down word problems. Splash Learning gives me in-depth feedback for each student and really how they are doing without them knowing. So that way I can really see if a student says they're good on the check-in form. Splash Learning might say otherwise if a student is really struggling with a certain topic. And then Padlet gives me a good idea of what goals students want to try and meet. And then evaluate their own progress. Again, Google Forms, Splash Learning, Padlet, and this time Genially. Google Forms, again, that check-in, being able to see students can kind of self-reflect on what they did, how they're doing. I would probably use Canvas instead of Google Forms for the practice quiz as written here, but either one would work for a practice quiz. Students can be able to evaluate themselves, getting an instantaneous score on the quiz, but not necessarily feedback. That one would take a bit more time. Splash Learning, again, students, they'll get feedback both if they get a problem right or wrong. So going forward, ultimately, the student will get feedback and hopefully best grow from that one. And then Genially is a fun way for students to kind of check themselves if they get an answer right within like the first couple clues, or obviously on a really good progress. If they get it anywhere during the 5 clues, again, progress, always progress. If they're struggling to get it after 5 clues, it shows that we might have a bit of work to do, but again, it's all about progress and taking that one extra step forward. Additional considerations, communication. So how will I promote student-to-student communication or collaboration? What tool or LMS feature will I use? I kind of mentioned this earlier. I was creating an asynchronous, most of this was kind of like out of school plan, especially with the Zoom side of things. So this one's actually incorrect. I'm going to delete this really quick. So I would use Canvas. I have that down here. Allow students to chat with one another, especially through a discussion board, check in on one another, see how they're doing, ask questions to one another, even if it's not even related to the lesson, just being able to talk with one another, still developing that social communication skill. But then also having Zoom as an option, either to meet with me or with other students. I would let students have that opportunity throughout the day. I'd probably set up, if it's a day, like a couple hour windows or a few half-hour windows that students can hop on and just check in. How I can encourage student-teacher communication, again, Zoom primarily. I'll set up times during the day, along with checking my email constantly as much as possible and responding as quickly as possible to questions or concerns that students might have. And then also, I'll maybe hop into the discussion board at times, respond to students that might not have a response yet, that kind of thing. How can I encourage accessibility and use UDL principles that support learning for all students? I can encourage accessibility more by having more choices for students to choose from, enabling students to choose assignments that are best for them. Additionally, I could include both written instruction and oral instructions. I met up with somebody else that was in Sarah's class that did this, and she was setting up both written instructions and recording audio things that students could play if they are maybe struggling with reading comprehension a little bit, especially since she was working with very younger elementary school students. So I really like that idea. If I were to actually turn this into a real lesson, I probably would have tried to do that. And then for UDL, I had checkpoint 9.1, promote expectations and beliefs that optimize motivation. I have multiple activities that encourage self-reflection, such as Genially, Canva, and Splash Learning assignments, as they all give students the opportunity to grow and learn. Additionally, the final check-in Google form will help with this, as this gives students an opportunity to reflect on their lesson and enables me to address any problems that may be there. Checkpoints 9.1, 8.1, heighten salience of goals and objectives, and 6.1, guide appropriate goal setting. I also have students setting goals both for themselves and for the class on the Padlet, which enables them to set their own expectations, along with staying motivated to hopefully achieve and meet these goals. Checkpoint 9.3, develop self-assessment and reflection. Splash learning can help to scaffold students, build them up on their learning, as this tool gives students instantaneous, well-in-depth feedback, along with opportunities to continue practicing and learning even after they have completed the necessary assignments. Again, for 9.3 and 8.3, foster collaboration and community. The final Google form will help with this, along with being able to connect with fellow classmates in an open discussion board and meet with me or other classmates through multiple means, such as Zoom, email, that kind of thing. That way, I am kind of like that more knowledgeable figure that Vygotsky would talk about, help to build them up. And then checkpoint 6.3, facilitate managing information and resources, is where the use of Canvas as my LMS is beneficial. This Canvas is a good way for students to self-monitor their learning and seeing what they completed and what they still need to complete. Additionally, all those extra options that may not be necessary but students may want to complete. By using so many different learning tools, checkpoint 2.5, illustrate through multiple media is met, as all of the tools help to develop the key concepts of adding and subtracting fractions, along with dividing shapes into equal parts and using this to represent those fractions. Additionally, different tools provide different types of activities and feedback, some of them being easier, some of them using more high in-depth concepts and thinking, meeting those higher level skill levels. There we go. I just lost where I was at. Additionally, different tools, there we go, different activities and feedback, enabling students to use different means of representation to demonstrate their knowledge. While things such as flash learning and the Google Swarm quiz may be multiple choice, things such as the Genially and Canva will take more thought. There we go. Sorry about that. As they are more open-ended activities, Genially has students applying their knowledge to come up with a shape, and Canva applies a higher level skill, having students compare and contrast different shapes and fractions. So now I will go back up to the top. For the ISC standard of 6 facilitator, 6.A, foster a culture where students take ownership of their learning goals and outcomes in both independent and group settings. This ISC standard is met by having students write out their own goals on the Padlet. This Padlet will both provide an outline of what is expected of the students, the SWOBAT's learning outcomes, along with goals of myself for the students. On here, students can add personal goals and goals for the class. This will enable students to take ownership of their learning by working to meet these goals and working to meet others' goals. Additionally, for independent and group settings, most of the assignments are created to be completed independently. However, students have the opportunity to chat and connect with other students on a Canvas open discussion board, email, Zoom, Padlet, in person, etc. These tools enable students to reach out to one another, and if students set up groups, if we are in person to work together, fantastic. I am not going to complain about student-student collaboration on these things. I'd rather students learn well together than learn poorly on their own. 6.B, manage the use of technology in student learning strategies and digital platforms, virtual environments, hands-on makerspaces, or in the field. This ISC standard is met quite simply with this being an asynchronous lesson in the module. Students will use different online learning platforms and tools to further their understanding of their lesson and topic. Additionally, students will work both possibly virtually or in-person environment, primarily independently, again with those opportunities to meet up with other students. Again, not going to complain if they don't work independently. 6.C, create learning opportunities that challenge students to use a design process and computational thinking to innovate and solve problems. Using the different learning tools, students will use their computational thinking to further their understanding of this unit. Some of the things students will be doing include working through lessons in a virtual environment called Splash Learning, creating and filling Venn diagrams using Canva, comparing and contrasting shapes and fractions using Canva, using computational thinking to break down word problems and easier questions, most likely using a Canvas quiz, using deeper understanding to discover what shapes is being described using Genially, set their own learning goals on Padlet, and hopefully work towards meeting these goals, and more. Additionally, students can be innovative in solving problems by using both the mandated resources along with the optional tools and activities, and potentially their own discovery of different tools. The standard 6.D, model and nurture creativity and creative expression to communicate ideas, knowledge, or connections. Students will have the opportunity to show off and demonstrate their knowledge in multiple ways. Students will be able to model their creativity by creating their own Venn diagram to compare and contrast fractions, again using Canva, not having many limitations or restrictions in how to do this. Students will also be able to show off their creativity when they're goal set on the class Padlet, as they can be as basic or complex in the addition to the shared page. It could be as simple as just stating the goal, or it could be as complex as putting the goal and hopefully how they hope to achieve it, including pictures, short videos of either themselves or a YouTube video that they found, different links to websites. Again, these are much higher level skills. I'm not going to expect any student to mandatory do that, but if a student wants to go above and beyond to do that, fantastic. Students are able to do what is best for themselves. Additionally, students will be able to get creative in how they communicate if they are virtual and interact with others, having Zoom, Canvas discussion boards, emails, and more. So, ultimately, Showcase 3 for me was very fun and enjoyable to do. If I had more time, and I honestly might do it over a winter break just for fun, I might create my own Canvas and make this into an actual lesson. I think that would be entertaining. I have seen a couple others that have done it. Theirs is really well done. Sadly, just with a lot of other stuff going on at the moment, this was easier for me to do. So I'm just going to roll through this really quick. Evaluations of the LMS usability in UDL. I know I checked that one off. Explanation of computational thinking. I know I checked that one off. Preparedness. Yeah, as prepared as possible as I can be in today's world. Professionalism. I hope I checked that one off. UDL principles and design. Again, I hope I checked that one off. Clarity of activity design in LMS. Hopefully between this video and the more in-depth written stuff, this is pretty clear. If stuff needs more clarity, just reach out to me, Bradley. I'm happy to go more in depth with stuff. I know I'm way over my time limit, so I was trying to keep this short. Obviously, I can't ever seem to do that. Connections to ISC standards, I know I met that, or I know I did that one. So this should all be good. I hope you had a really good Thanksgiving, Bradley. I hope that Philly is treating you well. I hope that you are having a fun time, I guess, showing off your research and hopefully finishing grad school soon enough. You're going to be a fantastic professor in the future, Bradley. I'm very lucky to have you. The whole class is. I really hope that since he keeps you, you're a wonderful teacher to have around here, especially just compared to some of the other ones I had this semester and some of the other ratings that I've read on Rate My Professor. Although I'm not going to ever judge someone completely on that. It's just a good starting spot. Some of the ratings for some of the other teachers is somewhat poor. So keep doing what you're doing, Bradley. Keep being you. Just being you, Bradley. You're fantastic. That's all I can say. Signing off for now. If you have any questions, just reach out. This is John Bailey with Showcase 3. I guess I won't see you later, but hopefully talk to you later, Bradley.